The needle slides in one more time, carrying what Michael Jackson calls his milk, the only thing that can pull him into the darkness he desperately craves. It's 3 a.m, June 2009, and the king of pop hasn't slept naturally in months. His body trembles on Egyptian cotton sheets worth more than most people's cars. But all the luxury in the world can't buy him 8 hours of peace. Welcome to the final year of Michael Jackson's life, where every sunrise feels like a death sentence and every sunset promises another sleepless nightmare. You think being the most famous person on the planet sounds like a dream. Try being trapped in a body that forgot how to rest while the entire world watches your every stumble. This isn't the glittery fairy tale the tabloids sold you. This is the story of a man drowning in his own success, choking on the very fame that made him a legend. By the time you finish this video, you'll understand why Michael Jackson's comeback tour became his funeral march, and why the phrase, "this is it," turned out to be more prophetic than anyone imagined. But first, let me paint you a picture of what rock bottom looks like when you're worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Picture this. You're Michael Jackson in January 2009, and you haven't had a proper night's sleep in over a year. Your skin hangs loose on your frame like expensive clothes on a scarecrow. Your hands shake when you think no one's looking. Every mirror in Neverland reflects a ghost wearing your face, and the only thing keeping you upright is the promise of one last tour. 50 shows that will either save your legacy or bury it forever. The irony cuts deeper than any tabloid headline ever could. Here's a man who spent decades perfecting the moonwalk, gliding backwards while the world moved forward, and now he's literally moving backwards through time, chasing sleep like a child chases shadows, grasping at memories of when his body actually obeyed his mind. The same hands that once made Thriller now tremble as they reach for pill bottles with names he can't pronounce. Let me tell you what nobody talks about when they discuss Michael Jackson's final year: the sheer physical torture of chronic insomnia. We're not talking about tossing and turning for a few hours. We're talking about a man whose brain had completely forgotten how to shut down. Doctors would later describe his condition as total sleep deprivation, a medical nightmare that turns your mind into a prison and your body into a battlefield. Imagine your worst sleepless night, then multiply that by 365 days straight. The press painted him as eccentric, but what they were really witnessing was a man slowly disintegrating from the inside out. Every public appearance became a performance not just of his music, but of basic human functionality. Smile for the cameras while your nervous system screams. Wave to the fans while your coordination crumbles. Sign autographs while your memory fragments like broken glass. Now here's where the story gets really dark. And trust me, we're just getting started. In March 2009, Michael announced his comeback tour. This is it, 50 shows at London's O2 Arena. The world went absolutely insane. Tickets sold out in hours. Fans camped outside venues for days. The media called it the greatest comeback in entertainment history. But behind the glittering press conferences and carefully choreographed announcements, Michael was already drowning. Think about the pressure for a second. You're Michael Jackson, arguably the greatest entertainer who ever lived, and you haven't performed a full concert in over 8 years. Your last major tour was overshadowed by scandal and controversy. Your finances are tangled in a web of debt and lawsuits. Your health is deteriorating by the day. And now you've promised the world 50 perfect shows, each one a testament to your legendary status. No pressure, right? The rehearsals began in May 2009, and from day one something was terribly wrong. Dancers and crew members would later testify that Michael looked frail, exhausted, sometimes confused. This was the same man who once rehearsed for 18 hours straight without breaking a sweat, now asking for breaks every few songs. The same perfectionist who could nail a routine after seeing it once was now requesting teleprompters, something he'd never needed in 40 years of performing. But here's the thing that makes this story truly tragic. Everyone around him knew something was wrong, but the machine kept grinding forward anyway. Concert promoters had millions of dollars on the line. Venues were booked. Fans had bought tickets. The show, as they say, must go on, even if the star is barely hanging on. Enter Dr. Conrad Murray, a cardiologist who somehow became Michael's personal physician and sleep specialist. Murray promised he could solve Michael's insomnia problem, and his solution was a cocktail of medications that would make a pharmacist's head spin. Valium to calm the nerves, Ativan to ease the anxiety, Versed to quiet the mind, and when all else failed, propofol, a powerful anesthetic that Michael nicknamed his milk because of its white, creamy appearance. Now, propofol isn't some over-the-counter sleep aid you pick up at the corner store. This is the stuff they use to knock you unconscious before major surgery. It's so potent that it's typically only administered in hospitals with full monitoring equipment and trained anesthesiologists standing by. Using it as a sleep aid is like using a sledgehammer to crack a walnut, technically effective, but catastrophically dangerous. But Michael was desperate, and desperation makes people do things that logic would never allow. Night after night, Murray would arrive at Michael's mansion with his medical bag full of solutions to a problem that was slowly killing his patient. The irony is suffocating. Here's a doctor supposedly trying to help a man sleep, but every injection was actually pushing him closer to a sleep he'd never wake up from. The final rehearsals in June grew more intense as the London shows approached. Michael would arrive late, leave early, sometimes struggle through songs he'd performed thousands of times before. His backup dancers had to adjust choreography on the fly when he couldn't keep up. His voice coach noticed his breathing was laboured. His costume designers had to keep taking in his clothes as his weight dropped week by week. But the most haunting detail of all, in those final weeks, Michael kept telling people he was afraid he wouldn't make it to London. He'd joke about it sometimes, that dark humour that performers use to mask their terror. Other times, he'd say it with a seriousness that made everyone in the room uncomfortable. Was it intuition? Was it the sleep deprivation talking? Or did some part of him already know that his body was preparing for its final performance? The final weeks of June 2009 played out like a medical horror story wrapped in sequins and spotlights. Each night, the ritual became more desperate, more dangerous. Murray would arrive at Michael's Holmby Hills mansion carrying his bag of pharmaceutical promises. First, they'd try the lighter stuff. Valium to ease the trembling, Ativan to quiet the racing thoughts. But Michael's body had built up a tolerance that would terrify any responsible physician. What used to knock him out for hours now barely made him drowsy. By 2 a.m, when normal sedatives failed, Murray would prepare the propofol. Picture this scene: the king of pop lying in his bedroom, IV line snaking into his arm, while a cardiologist plays Russian roulette with an anesthetic that could stop his heart in seconds. No monitoring equipment, no backup medical staff. Just 2 desperate men in a mansion, gambling with a life worth hundreds of millions. The math was simple and terrifying. Michael needed to be unconscious to escape his insomnia, but propofol required constant monitoring to keep him breathing. Murray was essentially performing surgery-level anesthesia in a bedroom, then walking away. It's like performing a high-wire act without a net, except the net is keeping your patient alive. Meanwhile, the This Is It rehearsals were becoming their own nightmare. Crew members watched in horror as their idol stumbled through routines that used to be second nature. The man who once commanded stages like a puppet master now needed assistance remembering his own lyrics. Backup dancers whispered about how his skin looked translucent under the stage lights, how his famous precision had devolved into shaky approximations of greatness. The pressure from all sides was crushing him like a vice. Concert promoters reminded him daily that millions of dollars hung on every performance. Fans had travelled from around the world, some spending their life savings on tickets. The media was watching for any sign of weakness, ready to pounce on the slightest stumble. And through it all, Michael's body was systematically shutting down from months of chemical sleep. His paranoia reached fever pitch in those final days. He'd tell close friends that people were trying to sabotage him, that forces beyond his control were conspiring to destroy his comeback. Was it paranoia, or was it the sleep-deprived mind of a man watching his world collapse in slow motion? When you haven't slept naturally in over a year, the line between reality and nightmare becomes impossibly thin. June 24th, 2009. Michael's final rehearsal at the Staples Center. Those who were there described a haunting performance. Glimpses of the old magic flickering through exhaustion like lightning through storm clouds. He nailed some moves, stumbled through others. His voice cracked on songs he'd sung 10,000 times. But for brief shining moments, the Michael Jackson everyone remembered blazed through the fog of fatigue and medication. That night, he returned home knowing he had just hours before the cycle would begin again. The inability to sleep, the desperate calls to Murray, the parade of pills that no longer worked. His body was running on fumes, held together by stage makeup and sheer willpower. Even the people closest to him were starting to realize that something had to give. Either Michael would find a way to sleep naturally, or his system would find a permanent solution for him. June 25th dawned like any other sleepless morning in the Jackson household. Michael had been awake for hours, pacing his bedroom, his mind racing despite his body's desperate need for rest. Murray arrived around midnight, beginning what would become the final chapter of their deadly routine. First came the Valium, no effect. Then Ativan, nothing. Versed followed, but Michael's tolerance had reached dangerous levels. By 6 in the morning, Murray was out of options, except the one that terrified him most. He prepared the propofol, that milky white liquid that Michael called his salvation. 25 milligrams, diluted with lidocaine, pushed slowly through the IV. For a few precious moments, it seemed to work. Michael's breathing slowed, his body relaxed, his tormented mind finally found the peace it had been seeking for months. But Murray made a fatal error. He left the room. Maybe he thought Michael was stable. Maybe he was making phone calls to his other patients. Maybe he just needed a break from watching a legend slowly self-destruct. Whatever the reason, when he returned, Michael Jackson was no longer breathing. The next hour unfolded in panic and chaos. CPR on a bed instead of a hard surface. Frantic phone calls instead of immediate emergency response. Attempts to hide evidence instead of focusing solely on saving a life. By the time paramedics arrived, Michael had been without oxygen for far too long. The same voice that had sung "Beat It" was now silent forever. At 2:26 p.m. Pacific Time, doctors at Ronald Reagan UCLA Medical Center pronounced Michael Joseph Jackson dead. The official cause, acute propofol intoxication. The man who had moonwalked his way into immortality had finally found the sleep he'd been desperately seeking, but it was a sleep from which there would be no comeback, no encore, no final bow. The world learned of Michael Jackson's death through breaking news alerts that shattered a Thursday afternoon like glass hitting concrete. Within minutes, social media exploded. News anchors scrambled to confirm reports. Radio stations switched to emergency broadcasts. The man who had soundtracked 3 generations of human experience was gone, and the collective shock rippled across every continent. But here's what makes this tragedy even more devastating. It was completely preventable. Every single element that led to Michael's death was a choice made by desperate people under impossible pressure. The tour that was supposed to save his career became the very thing that killed him. The doctor who promised to heal him became his executioner. The sleep he'd been chasing for months finally caught him, but it came with a price tag nobody should ever have to pay. Dr. Conrad Murray was convicted of involuntary manslaughter 2 years later, sentenced to 4 years in prison for his role in the death of the King of Pop. During the trial, the full scope of Michael's final months came to light. The cocktail of medications, the reckless medical decisions, the warnings ignored by everyone who should have protected him. Murray claimed he was trying to wean Michael off propofol, but the evidence painted a different picture. A physician so far out of his depth that he couldn't see the iceberg until it had already torn his patient's life apart. The This Is It tour was cancelled, obviously. 50 shows that would have grossed over $1 billion. Gone. The stage was set, the dancers rehearsed, the fans ready, but the star had taken his final bow. The posthumous movie made from rehearsal footage became a haunting monument to what might have been, showing glimpses of the magic that died with him. What's truly heartbreaking is that Michael Jackson's final year wasn't just about his physical deterioration. It was about watching a perfectionist realize he could no longer achieve perfection. The man who had spent his entire life pushing boundaries, breaking records, and redefining what entertainment could be, spent his last month struggling to remember lyrics he'd written decades earlier. The cruel irony is suffocating. The very standards that made him legendary became the prison that trapped him in his final act. So the next time someone tells you that fame and fortune solve all problems, remember Michael Jackson's last year. Remember that all the money in the world couldn't buy him 8 hours of natural sleep. Remember that surrounded by hundreds of people, he died essentially alone, his body finally succumbing to the chemical cocktail that had become his only escape from consciousness. Michael Jackson didn't just die on June 25, 2009. He'd been dying slowly for months, one sleepless night at a time, one injection at a time, one cancelled rehearsal at a time. The king of pop became a prisoner of his own genius, trapped in a body that had forgotten how to rest, and a mind that couldn't stop racing toward a finish line that turned out to be a cliff. The milk he craved so desperately in those final months wasn't salvation. It was slow-motion suicide, administered by a doctor who should have known better, and enabled by an industry that valued profit over the life of its greatest star. In the end, Michael Jackson got exactly what he'd been seeking for over a year. Perfect, uninterrupted sleep. He just never got to wake up from it.